A Mother's Love by Mayhew Cullen. Read by Goombasa. The tiny filly sat on the cave floor, happily cooing and gurgling as newly born foals often do. She was a Pegasus with a warm pink coat and an oddly dreary two-toned black and dark purple mane. Still, in spite of her unusual location, a pure contentedness shone from the sparkling green eyes that had no doubt been inherited from her mother. Contentment, happiness, these were the only things her mother ever wished for her child to have. Certainly, at such a young age, a mother's sustaining love was more than enough to ensure a filly's cheerfulness, but what of the future? How could she justify keeping her offspring hidden away in a cave? Eventually, her daughter would want to explore beyond the cave, seeking the one thing her mother could not provide: friendship. The mother coughed heavily, tasting a metallic ichor in the back of her throat. She pushed her sickly blue mane out from the front of her eyes with an oddly perforated black hoof. Her dragon-like green eyes matched her daughter's in appearance and remained focused on the quill and parchment in front of her. Each was held in a green aura as the pen slid carefully, putting words to the page. Still, the pen strokes were rushed, and every thought on the page was only half complete. Well, all but one. That point was communicated with an odd consistency that begged for it to be noticed by the reader.
Dear Princess Celestia, surely you will be overjoyed to hear that I will soon be dead. Please, however, do not disregard the rest of this message. First, know that I do not, nor will I ever apologize for my actions at mia amore Cadenza's wedding. I am not seeking forgiveness for my choices, but I am also not seeking to justify them to you. My current location is 746 leagues south by southwest of your castle, in a cave with an entrance lined with moss. I only mention this because I am sure you would love the opportunity to gloat while I still have some life left in me. Also, perhaps you would like to meet my daughter. I have found recently that love magic is a curious thing. When Cadenza and Shining Armor expelled my army and myself from Canterlot, some of their love managed to, let us just say, it entered me. Not in the way that would feed me and make me stronger, but in the way that feeds off me and weakens my already wounded body. I never knew that foals had such insatiable appetites. Oh yes, I don't believe I mentioned yet, she is a filly. A little pony, just like all your subjects. Maybe. Do Pegasi usually drool every waking moment of their young lives? It is rather disgusting. I may ask you to take her with you after your visit. You also don't have to worry too much about her smell. I have kept her clean, but I am growing weary of the constant upkeep required to do so. Anyway, enough about the little one, as I said before. I am dying. Perhaps Cadenza and Shining Armor would like to hear that as well. Maybe I should be a little more honest. My daughter isn't exactly a pony like your subjects. She is also a bit like me. She doesn't consume love the same way I would, but she does take love from me that I could have used to survive. Isn't it odd that instead of destroying the parasite, I find myself more than willing to give my life for hers? Yes, I get the irony. Oh, she's crying again. Why don't you come visit us and we can finish our little talk? Maybe you could bring something for the little one to eat so she isn't bored by our adult conversation. Or, I suppose you could take her to your palace and feed her there, and raise her, and love her. Your fallen adversary, Chrysalis, abject mother and former queen of the changelings.
Rolling the parchment into a scroll with her magic, Chrysalis coughed again before focusing her magic into a gout of green flame that consumed the letter. If she were the sort to believe in a god, the changeling might have prayed for the letter to reach its intended recipient. Instead, she merely laid down beside the crying filly and used a hoof to pull the little pony close. She was just about to slip into a restless sleep when the sudden sound of magic seemed to echo through the small cave she had been calling home. Chrysalis smiled. The sound had been that of a half-dozen teleportation spells. Certainly she was not equipped to entertain multiple guests, but she understood and even applauded Celestia's foresight in being on guard enough to bring soldiers. "You wanted to see me?" Celestia stood tall and spoke with the warmth of a noonday sun. Her guards waited patiently, ready to leap to their princess's aid should the need arise. Chrysalis, on the other hoof, merely smiled at the Princess of the Sun before replying,
Certainly, we do have a bit of business to discuss after all.
Business? The confusion in Celestia's voice reminded the changeling of a summer breeze, but still aggravated her, as it meant wasting another portion of her remaining lifespan to explain. So she rolled her eyes at Celestia's ignorance. It was obvious now that she had given too much credit in regard to the princess's powers of deduction. Still, she was not above reproach herself, so with a sigh she spoke.
The business in my punishment. I imagine it will be execution. At first I thought it might be exile, but really aren't I already in exile?
Celestia's eyes darkened at the mention of capital punishment. Such practice had been abolished long ago, and Celestia would not allow such a thing so long as she lived. Her tone became harsh, reminding Chrysalis of a smouldering ember. And what, pray tell, would my reason be for putting you to death? With another roll of her eyes, the former changeling queen replied,
I committed a crime. Do you not punish criminals in your country? I'll be dead soon anyway, so I guess whatever torture you devise will be more than adequate.
It was then that the small filly in her gentle embrace stirred, causing Chrysalis to suddenly smile. It was not a smile Celestia was used to seeing from the changeling. It was true that she had little experience with them as a species, but the malicious grin that Chrysalis had worn at the wedding a year ago was nothing like the expression she wore when looking at her filly? After stretching for a moment, the foal opened her eyelids, revealing the cat-like green orbs to the princess. Celestia finally understood. Everything in the letter made sense now. Chrysalis was dying, and she wanted, no, needed some pony to take care of her foal. Celestia realized why Chrysalis could not simply leave the filly at any doorstep in Equestria. It was then that she found she couldn't help but whisper, "She's so beautiful." The changeling beamed, though there was a strange sadness in her voice as she replied,
Even though she has my eyes, right? I also gave her a pony name, so you won't have to worry about that. I named her Crystal Dream. I honestly can't help but feel silly saying it, so I just call her Chrissy for short.
Chrysalis suddenly felt it. Love, real love, spontaneous and unconditional love directed at her little pony. Maybe the ex-queen had chosen the proper surrogate mother for her daughter, a thought that became fact when Celestia uttered her next words. "Why say that when you have such lovely eyes?" A flash of magic materialized a bottle of warmed milk. She had gotten an odd look from her head chef when she requested food for a foal, but was able to convince him that his career would last much longer if he obeyed a direct order from his employer. She would have to apologize when she returned, but for now there was a hungry filly to feed. The bottle floated slowly down into the tiny pony's reach, and without hesitation, Crystal clamped her jaws onto the rubber tip and began suckling, showing the obvious instinct to nurse that any pony would be born with. That was all the proof the ruler of Equestria needed, that this was indeed a pony deserving her protection. Chrysalis chuckled warmly, which she instantly regretted as it drew out another fit of heavy coughing. After she managed to calm herself, the changeling spoke in her most civilized tone so far.
I figured it out. You can punish me for my crimes by taking my daughter from me and raising her as your own. Raise her as your own and never tell her of her true origins and the monster that is her mother.
Tears welled up in both of the elder pony's eyes. Chrysalis wept at her own weakness, but Celestia's tears were out of concern that the dying queen before her was so unwilling to release her true feelings in her final hour. The princess spoke through her tears. Her voice was pleading, begging to be heard. The sound reminded Chrysalis of falling rain. "Please, Chrysalis, please give up your pride and make your request. Despite what you might think, you are a subject under my protection. So please, tell me your true desire. Tell me, my little pony, why you sent me that letter." Chrysalis could not stop her tears. Truly, she had underestimated the equestrian ruler. She had never wept openly, but she didn't take the time to appreciate the irony that the first creature she had cried in front of was, at one time, her most powerful enemy. Instead, she spoke, openly baring her feelings to the Princess of the Sun.
I want to live. I want to watch my little Chrissy grow up and make friends. I want to watch her fall in love. I want to watch her raise little fillies and colts of her own. I don't want to die before I get to see what kind of mare she will be.
Chrysalis stood in renewed defiance. She would not die here. She would fight and take Celestia's place. She would... Look down. Celestia's voice quelled the changeling's rage instantly, like cool running water. Chrysalis found herself obeying without question. What she saw was certainly not something she was expecting. Below and behind her, lying peacefully on the cave floor, was a changeling queen curled around a tiny foal, still suckling on an empty bottle. Chrysalis was silent, leaving plenty of room for Celestia to speak. "This is truly the most painful of my duties, and for reasons that should be obvious, I am still unwilling to burden my sister and faithful student with such things."
How long have I been...
The question was unfinished, but it was one the princess had often been asked. Celestia's tone once again became warming to the now fearful changeling. "Not too long. Just before I arrived. You sent me the letter, and when you fell asleep it was for the last time. I would say you should be thankful to have gone with such peace, but if that were the case you would not have regrets, and you would not be here. I cannot bring you back, but I can promise you 2 things. I promise I will raise your daughter as my own. She will never have a need that will not be filled. She will never fear isolation or animosity, but instead she will live in companionship and goodwill. Above all, however, she will know your name, and she will hold that name in the highest regard." Chrysalis felt as if she were drifting away on a gentle tide, but still managed to speak.
And for the second promise?
Celestia smiled. The warmth seemed to be like a gentle spring after the harshest winter, and her voice was the same. "I promise that you will see her grow and play with friends. You will see her fall in love, and you will see her raise her own foals. You will watch her grow old, and when the time comes, she will join you and joyfully tell you what kind of mare your daughter has become." Without another word, Celestia lowered her horn to touch the conscious spirit of Chrysalis. In a flash the soul was gone, and a bright green star bloomed in Luna's night sky. 5 years later. "Mommy, Auntie Una says the tickle monster's gonna get me." Celestia looked down at the tiny pink Pegasus that had her minuscule legs wrapped around her left front hoof. With a smile and a flourish of magic, Celestia lifted the young filly to eye level. She then allowed herself a mischievous grin before speaking. "Well, little Chrissy, I guess that means Auntie Luna forgot to mention who the tickle monster was." Celestia paused as her younger sister came into view behind the currently floating filly. The elder princess gave her sibling a playful wink as she leaned in to whisper in young Crystal's ear, "I'm the tickle monster." Without missing a beat, Chrissy began squirming to escape Celestia's magic, but was unable to resist giggling uncontrollably when the Princess of the Sun pressed her lips against the filly's belly and blew the biggest raspberry she could. Then, as she nuzzled her daughter, Celestia felt the old memories afflict her, forcing tears to well up in her ordinarily regal eyes. It was not the first time, and it would not be the last, but today was the first time Chrissy had noticed her mother's tears. "Mommy, why are you crying?" The tiny filly's voice was filled with an insurmountable concern. It was something so pure that even in her darkest moments, Celestia had to smile warmly. The princess spoke then, with a truly motherly tone. "I'll tell you when you're older, dear. Now, it's almost sundown, and that means bedtime." If making puppy dog eyes was a skill to be learned, Celestia had to admit that her daughter had mastered it. Chrissy's eyes and tone of voice were equally pleading as she stared into her mother's own eyes. "Oh, but I want to see Auntie Luna raise the moon. Please, Mommy?" Celestia chuckled warmly. "All right, but right to bed after that. Your Auntie Twilight said she wanted to teach you how to make a proper book for it." "And Uncle Spike is going to tell me how to be a library." After another warm bout of laughter, Celestia guided her filly to Luna's tower to watch the changing from day to night. The stars were exceptionally bright that night, but none more so than one that seemed to glow brighter when a particular little pony looked up at it. Seeing the brightness increase, Chrissy bounced with joy as she exclaimed, "Look, Mommy! Chrysalis is smiling again!" Celestia almost laughed at her daughter's attempt to pronounce the star's name, but instead only replied warmly as she looked up at the verdant star. "That's right, sweetheart. Do you remember why Chrysalis is smiling?" The tiny Pegasus flapped her wings with excitement before proudly replying, "Because she protects and loves me." Then, with a deep breath, Crystal shouted as loud as she could while waving happily at the green star. "Thank you, Chrissy Whistle. I love you." The end.